Fez. Chapter 6. The weather was perfect, sunny and clear, as Hilary looked out of the train window on her way to Fez. In her carriage was a small Frenchman who looked like a businessman, a nun, and two Moroccan ladies with lots of packages who talked happily to each other. The Frenchman offered to light Hilary's cigarette, and soon he was talking about Morocco and telling Hilary about some of the sights that they passed. He was an interesting and intelligent man. "It must be a change for you," he said, "coming here from England, so cold, so foggy, so unpleasant." "Yes, it's very different here," Hilary agreed. "I myself travelled from Paris 3 weeks ago. There, too, there was fog and rain, while here it is all sunshine. How was the weather in England when you left?" "Like Paris," said Hilary. "It was foggy." "Ah, yes, it is the foggy season, and snow. Have you had snow this year?" "No," said Hilary. "There has been no snow." She was amused that the Frenchman thought the English always talked about the weather. The journey continued. The two Moroccan ladies got off, and other travellers got on the train. It was evening when they arrived at Fez. Hilary stood on the station platform, confused by the noise and the shouts of all the porters who wanted to take her luggage. "Let me help you, madame," said the Frenchman. "I believe you said you are staying at the Palais Hime. It is 8 kilometers from here." "It's not in the town, then?" Hilary asked. "It is by the old town," the Frenchman explained. "Me, I am staying here in the city, but the Palais Hime is where people go to relax. It has beautiful gardens, and from there you can go straight to the old city of Fez. I will arrange a taxi for you." "You're very kind," said Hilary gratefully. The Frenchman arranged everything for her, and just before she left, he gave Hilary his card, which read, "Monsieur Henri Laurier." Hilary sat nervously in the taxi. Was she really going to her hotel, or was this where her journey into the unknown began? But soon she did indeed arrive at the Palais Hime, a lovely old Moroccan palace, with a terrace overlooking a beautiful garden full of orange trees and scented flowers. Her room was decorated in Eastern style and was full of modern comforts. Later, Hilary enjoyed an excellent dinner and then had coffee outside on the terrace. There she noticed a very old man with a yellow-tinted face and a small beard. The hotel staff served him very attentively, taking away his empty plates immediately and hurrying to his table as soon as he looked up. Hilary wondered who he was, but she was too tired to think about it and went to bed early. The next morning, Hilary sat outside in the sunshine under a red-striped umbrella. It was strange to sit in such a peaceful place, pretending to be a dead woman. As she watched children run up and down the terrace, Hilary couldn't believe that anything unusual was going to happen. The old man with the yellow face came up to the terrace from the gardens below and sat down at a table nearby. When Hilary ordered a drink, she asked the waiter, "Who is that old man over there?" "That, madame," the waiter said quietly, "is Monsieur Aristides. He is enormously rich." Hilary looked over at the old man, just as he too looked up. They stared at each other for a moment until the old man looked away. Hilary thought that Mr. Aristides' eyes looked alive and intelligent. Later in the afternoon, as Hilary was resting outside, a shadow suddenly appeared on her chair. She looked up, surprised to see Mr. Aristides. He was not looking at Hilary, and when he turned round he accidentally knocked her glass off the table. "Ah, pardon me, madame," Mr. Aristides said politely. Hilary smiled and said in French that it did not matter. Mr. Aristides then told the waiter to bring her another drink before he apologized again and went into the restaurant. When the waiter brought her drink, Hilary asked him if Mr. Aristides was alone at the hotel. The waiter was shocked. "Oh, no, madame," he said. "Monsieur Aristides is so rich that he never travels alone. He has a personal servant, 2 secretaries, and a driver." But when she went into the restaurant, Hilary noticed that the old man sat by himself. The afternoon passed very pleasantly. Hilary walked through the beautiful gardens, looking at the oranges and smelling the different flowers. The place was very peaceful, and Hilary wished she could stay forever. It was strange that she had found peace at last, just when she was starting a dangerous adventure. But perhaps there was no danger, and no adventure. When she went back inside the hotel, late in the afternoon, Hilary was surprised to meet Mrs. Baker in the lounge. "I've just arrived by plane," Mrs. Baker explained. "Trains are so slow, and the people in them aren't always very clean. Now, tell me what you've been doing, Mrs. Betterton. Have you seen the old town yet?" "No, I'm afraid I haven't," said Hilary, smiling. "I've just been sitting in the sun." "Oh, yes, you've just come out of hospital," said Mrs. Baker. "I suppose you must be tired." "I never feel tired. Do you remember Miss Hetherington, the English woman at Casablanca? She'll be arriving here this evening. She prefers to travel by train, or perhaps that's all she can afford. Now, I must go and sort out my room. I didn't like the one they first gave me." Mrs. Baker left, energetic as always. Hilary saw Miss Hetherington in the dining room that evening, and then she and the 2 new arrivals had coffee together. Miss Hetherington had discovered that a rich Swedish businessman was staying at the hotel with a blonde film star. "And they're not married," she said excitedly. "There's so much of that kind of thing abroad. There's a nice French family at the table by the window, though, of course, French children are allowed to stay up far too late. Their parents even let them drink wine." She sounded horrified. Meanwhile, Mrs. Baker was making plans for the next day. "I've been to the old city before," she said. "It was very interesting, but I was glad I had a guide with me. All those twisting streets, without him I would have become very lost. Of course, he took me to a friend's house, they always do, and wanted me to buy lots of souvenirs. I had to be quite firm." Miss Hetherington sighed. "It would be nice to buy souvenirs, but they're so expensive," she said sadly. Chapter 7. Fortunately, Hilary was able to visit the old city of Fez without Miss Hetherington or Mrs. Baker, who had gone on a sightseeing trip by car, for which Mrs. Baker paid. With her guide, Hilary walked down through the gardens of the hotel until they reached a big door in the wall. And through that door, Hilary stepped into another world, the old city of Fez. Hilary wandered through the narrow, twisting streets, interested in everything she saw. She enjoyed looking around her at the busy life of the Moroccan city. The only annoyance was her guide, who talked all the time, asking her to buy things. "You look, lady," he kept saying, "this man have very nice things, very cheap." Hilary walked for what seemed like hours, until finally her guide said, "I take you to very nice house now, lady. Friends of mine, you have tea, and they show you many nice things." Because she was tired, Hilary allowed herself to be taken to an attractive house outside the city walls. Here she drank mint tea and, to be polite, bought a few small souvenirs. "Now, I take you for a nice drive to see very beautiful views," said her guide. "And then back to hotel. But first, this girl will take you to very nice ladies' toilet." Smiling a little, Hilary followed the girl to the toilet, which she was pleased to find had running water. But when she had washed her hands, Hilary found that she couldn't open the door. Why had she been locked in? Then she noticed another door in the corner of the room. This door opened easily, and Hilary walked into a small room lit by high windows. Sitting on an Eastern-style chair was the little Frenchman she had met in the train, Monsieur Henri Laurier. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Betterton," he said. For a moment Hilary was too surprised to speak. So this was it. This was what she had been waiting for. She stepped forward. "Do you have news for me? Can you help me?" He nodded. "On the train, madame, you were rather stupid. Or perhaps you always talk about the weather." The weather? She stared at him. What had he said about the weather? Cold? Fog? Snow? Snow! That was it! Olive Betterton had talked about snow. What was the silly rhyme she had said? Hilary remembered. "Snow, snow, beautiful snow, you slip on a lump and over you go," she repeated to Laurier. "Exactly," said Laurier. "Why did you not follow your instructions and say that before?" "You don't understand," said Hilary. "I was in a plane crash and I've been in hospital with concussion. It has affected my memory and I've forgotten a lot of important things." "Yes," said Laurier. "The plane crash was unfortunate." His voice was cold. "But are you now ready to continue your journey?" "Of course I am," said Hilary. "I must see my husband." He smiled, but not a very pleasant smile. "You were questioned by the British authorities," he said. "Do you think they suspect you?" "I don't know," said Hilary. "They seemed satisfied, but I have the feeling that I'm being followed." "We know that," said Laurier coldly. "We are not stupid." "I'm sorry," said Hilary. "I'm afraid it's me who is stupid." "It does not matter if you are stupid, as long as you do as you are told, as long as you obey." "I will obey," said Hilary quietly. "Now, madame, I will give you your instructions," said Laurier. "The day after tomorrow you will fly back to Marrakesh. There you will receive a message telling you to go back to England." "I am going back to England?" "Please listen, I have not finished. You will book a seat on the plane, leaving for Casablanca the next day. Do you understand?" "I understand," said Hilary. "Then please return to your guide. You have been in here long enough. But before you go, I believe that you have become friendly with an American woman and an English woman at your hotel?" "Yes, is that wrong?" "No, it fits in with our plans. See if one or other of them will come with you to Marrakesh. Goodbye, madame." Hilary went back to her guide. "I have very nice car waiting," he said. "I take you now for very pleasant drive." "So you're leaving for Marrakesh tomorrow?" said Miss Hetherington. "You haven't stayed very long in Fez, have you?" "No," agreed Hilary, "but my tickets are booked now, and I think it will be too difficult to change them again. There are so many other people travelling." "Not English people," said Miss Hetherington sadly. "They all seem to be French." Hilary smiled faintly. The fact that Morocco was controlled by the French did not seem to matter to Miss Hetherington. "There are a lot of Germans and Swedish people here, too," added Mrs. Baker. "And I'm told that that little old man over there is Greek. He seems to be important, or at least the waiters think he is." "I wish you two would come to Marrakesh with me," said Hilary. "It's been so pleasant talking to you here, and it's very lonely travelling by myself." "But I've been to Marrakesh," said Miss Hetherington in a shocked voice. Mrs. Baker, however, seemed interested. "That's quite a good idea," she said. "I'd like to go back to Marrakesh, and I can show you around. I'll go and see if I can arrange it." She stood up and hurried off with her usual energy. "That's just like Americans," said Miss Hetherington, annoyed. "They always rush from place to place. Sometimes I don't think they know what country they're in." She picked up her knitting and said goodbye to Hilary before going upstairs. Hilary sat alone in the hotel lounge. She was thinking about the future. Now she was going to start her real journey, so she must be very careful and not make any mistakes. She must be Olive Betterton, devoted to her husband. Hilary jumped in surprise as she saw the small, wrinkled face of Mr. Aristides suddenly appear before her. He bowed politely and asked if he could sit down. After a moment or two, he asked, "Do you like this country, madame?" "I've been here only a short time," said Hilary. "But yes, I love it, and the old city of Fez is wonderful." "Yes, it is wonderful," he agreed. "There everything is dark and secret, shut in behind narrow streets and walls. Do you know what I think of, madame, when I walk through the streets of Fez?" "No." "I think of that main road into London, the Great West Road. I think of the great factory buildings on each side of the road, brightly lit so you can clearly see all the people inside as you drive along in your car. There is nothing hidden. There is nothing secret." "So you mean," said Hilary thoughtfully, "that you are interested in the contrast between them, Fez and the road in London, because they are so different?" Mr. Aristides nodded. "Yes," he said. "But although they look so different, the same things happen in both places. There is always cruelty, and there is always kindness. one or the other, sometimes both. He continued without changing his manner. "I have been told, madame, that you were in a very bad plane accident. I envy you." Hilary looked at him with astonishment. "Yes," he repeated, "I envy you. You have come close to death, and yet you survived. Do you feel different since then, madame?" "Only in a bad way," said Hilary. "I had concussion, and so I get headaches and forget things easily." "Those things will get better," said Mr. Aristides with a wave of his hand. "But you have had an adventure of the spirit, have you not?" "It is true," said Hilary slowly, thinking of a pile of sleeping pills. "I have had an adventure of the spirit." "I have never had that experience," said Mr. Aristides in a dissatisfied voice. "So many other things, but not that." He stood up and bowed politely. "Goodbye, madame," he said, and left Hilary sitting alone once again. Chapter 8. All airports are strangely alike, thought Hilary as she waited for the plane to Marrakesh. And why do you have to get there much too early? They had been sitting in the waiting room for nearly an hour. Mrs. Baker, who had decided to come with Hilary, had been talking for the whole time. Now, thankfully, she was talking to two other travellers who were sitting near her. They were both tall young men with fair hair. One was an American with a big friendly smile, and the other was a rather serious-looking Norwegian who talked slowly in careful English. The American was clearly delighted to find another traveller from his own country. Mrs. Baker turned to Hilary. She said, "I'd like you to meet my friend, Mrs. Betterton." "My name's Andrew Peters," said the American. "My friends call me Andy." The other young man stood up and bowed rather stiffly. "My name is Torquil Eriksson," he said. "Now we all know each other," said Mrs. Baker happily. Suddenly the loudspeaker gave an announcement in French, telling them that they could now board the plane. As well as Hilary and Mrs. Baker, there were 4 other passengers: Peters, Eriksson, a tall, thin Frenchman, and a stern-looking nun. It was a clear, sunny day, good for flying, and Hilary sat back in her seat and looked at her fellow passengers. Mrs. Baker was reading a magazine. Now and then she tapped the shoulder of the fair young American, Peters, who was sitting in front of her. He always turned round with a smile, responding to Mrs. Baker's remarks with enthusiasm. "How friendly Americans are," thought Hilary. "Not like the English." Sitting across from her was the Norwegian, Torquil Eriksson. As she looked at him, he nodded and offered her his magazine to read. Hilary thanked him and took it. In the seat behind Eriksson sat the thin Frenchman. His legs were stretched out, and he seemed to be asleep. Then Hilary looked behind her at the stern-looking nun, who looked back at Hilary with no expression on her face. She sat very still. 6 different people, thought Hilary, travelling together for a few hours and then separating, never to meet again. She closed her eyes and thought again about the instructions she had been given. Why was she going back to England? Didn't they trust her? Had she made a mistake? Or was it because she was being watched? To get home she would have to stop in Paris. And Tom Betterton had disappeared in Paris. Was the same thing going to happen to her? At last she grew tired of thinking and fell asleep. When she woke up, the plane was flying in circles, preparing to land. Hilary looked out of the window, but she couldn't see an airfield below her, nor could she see any houses or a town, just desert. This wasn't Marrakesh. Where were they? The plane landed with a bump in the middle of nowhere. The pilot asked them all to get out. Had something gone wrong with the plane, Hilary wondered? Outside, the wind blew cold from the snow-topped mountains in the distance. The pilot asked them to wait, and soon they saw a vehicle moving slowly towards them. It was a big car, a station wagon. "But why have we landed here?" asked Hilary. "What's the matter? Did the engine fail?" Andy Peters smiled cheerfully. "I don't think so," he said, "but I'm sure that's what they'll say." Hilary stared at him, puzzled. The station wagon arrived and the Moroccan driver got out. Together with the pilot and with help from Ericsson and Peters, they lifted out a large, heavy crate from the back of the car. As they went to open it, Mrs. Baker led Hilary away. "Don't watch, my dear. It's never a nice thing to see." The Frenchman and Peters followed them. "Are you Dr. Barron?" Mrs. Baker asked the Frenchman. "I am." The Frenchman bowed. "I'm pleased to meet you," said Mrs. Baker, shaking his hand as if she was welcoming him to a party. "I don't understand," said Hilary. "What's in that crate? Why is it better not to look?" Andy Peters looked at her. He had a nice face, Hilary thought. "There are bodies in the crate," Peters said. "The pilot told me." "Bodies?" She stared at him. "Oh, they weren't murdered or anything," he smiled. "They're dead bodies used for medical research." But Hilary still stared. "I still don't understand," she said. "You see, Mrs. Betterton, this is where the journey ends," explained Peters. "They'll arrange the bodies in the plane and then set it on fire. People will think that another plane has crashed with no survivors." "But why?" said Hilary. "Don't you know?" said Dr. Barron. "Where we are going?" "Of course she knows," said Mrs. Baker cheerfully, "but I don't think she expected it to happen quite so soon." Hilary said with surprise, "But you mean all of us?" She looked round. "We're fellow travellers," said Peters gently. The young Norwegian, Torquil Ericsson, nodded in agreement. "Yes, we are all fellow travellers," he said, with enthusiasm. Chapter 9. The pilot approached them. "You must leave now, please," he said. "We have much to do, and we are already late." Hilary stepped back and nervously put her hand up to her throat. The necklace of pearls that she was wearing broke under her fingers, and she quickly picked up the loose pearls and put them in her pocket. They all got into the station wagon where Hilary sat between Peters and Mrs. Baker. So you are in charge of organising us all?" Hilary asked Mrs. Baker. "That's right," Mrs. Baker replied. "It's quite natural for an American woman to travel around a lot." Mrs. Baker still looked the same, but Hilary thought that she acted differently. She was more efficient and perhaps more ruthless. "The newspapers will say that you were very unlucky, dear," added Mrs. Baker. "Nearly dying in one plane crash and then being killed so soon in another." "Who are these other people?" Hilary asked quietly. "They're all scientists," Mrs. Baker replied. "I don't really understand what they all do, but Dr. Barron works with viruses and diseases. Mr. Erickson is a brilliant physicist, and Mr. Peters is a nuclear chemist. And Miss Needheim, of course, isn't a nun. She's a German biologist. Me, I'm just the organizer. I don't belong with the scientists." She laughed. "That Hetherington woman never had a chance." "Miss Hetherington," said Hilary. "Was she—" Mrs. Baker nodded. "She was following you," she said. "But it would have been out of character if she had come back to Marrakesh so soon. She'll tell someone new to follow you from Marrakesh when you arrive, but of course you won't arrive." She laughed again, just as they heard a sudden loud noise. "Ah, look! That's the plane." They had been driving across the desert, and when Hilary looked back, she saw a big yellow glow behind them. The plane had exploded and was on fire. Andy Peters laughed. "6 people die when plane to Marrakesh crashes." It's rather frightening," said Hilary quietly. "Travelling to an unknown destination?" Peters said. He was serious now. "Yes, but it's the only way. We're leaving the past behind and are stepping out towards the future." He spoke with sudden enthusiasm. "We have to leave the old bad things behind. The new world of science will be clean and clear." Hilary took a deep breath. "That's the kind of thing my husband says," she replied carefully. "Your husband?" said Peters. "Is your husband Tom Betterton?" Hilary nodded. "That's great," said Peters. "I've never met him, but of course I know about Z.E. Fission. He worked with Dr. Mannheim, didn't he? I thought he married Mannheim's daughter?" "I'm his second wife," said Hilary, her face a little red. Elsa died in America." "I remember now," said Peters. "He went to work in England, but he disappeared from Paris. Everything is very well organized." Hilary agreed with him. Secretly she was worried. There was no trail for anyone to follow, and all the codes and signs she had learned were now useless. She was indeed on her way to an unknown destination, and there was nothing to show where she had gone. All there was to find was a burnt plane and 6 dead bodies. Would Jessup guess that she wasn't dead? They drove on. Night fell, and still they drove on through the desert. The ground was rough and bumpy, and they were obviously not on a main road. For a long time Hilary sat still, thoughts turning in her head, but at last she was too tired to stay awake any longer. She let her eyes close and fell into an uneasy sleep. The car had stopped. "Wake up," Peters said gently to Hilary. "We've arrived somewhere." Everyone got out of the station wagon, tired and stiff. It was still dark, but in front of them they could see a house surrounded by palm trees, and Hilary could see the lights from a village in the distance. Inside the house they were greeted by 2 laughing local Moroccan women who led them upstairs. The men went to one room, while the 3 women were taken into a small room with 3 mattresses on the floor. "My body's so stiff," complained Mrs. Baker. "That car was very uncomfortable on that bumpy road." "Discomfort does not matter," said Miss Needheim, the nun. Her voice was harsh and confident, and she spoke English well, though with a strong foreign accent. "It is weakness. When you are strong, nothing is too much to suffer." "Well, All I want now is a comfortable bed, said Mrs. Baker, yawning. And I'm sure that journey hasn't helped your concussion, has it, Mrs. Betterton? No, it hasn't, Hilary agreed. They'll bring us something to eat soon, said Mrs. Baker, and then I'll give you some medicine to help your headache. Sure enough, the two local women soon brought them a tray of food and some water to wash with. They stood and looked at Hilary's European clothes, laughing and talking to each other until Mrs. Baker waved them away. Silly things, said Mrs. Baker. I suppose all they are interested in is clothes and babies. It is all they are fit for, said Miss Needhime. They are slaves, and their only use is to serve. That's very unfair, said Hilary, annoyed by the woman's attitude. I only speak the truth. There are a few people who rule, and there are many who serve. But surely, Mrs. Baker interrupted, it is time to rest now, she said firmly. And after they had eaten some food and washed, the three women lay down to sleep. They slept late the next day, and when they woke up, Mrs. Baker gave them some Moroccan clothes to wear. She explained that they had to leave their European clothes behind. Now that Miss Needhime was no longer dressed as a nun, Hilary could see her properly. The German woman was about 33 and looked very neat, but her pale face and cold eyes were not attractive. She was arrogant, and acted as if Hilary and Mrs. Baker were not good enough to talk to her. Hilary much preferred the laughing local women. And Mrs. Baker, she was still talking normally about everyday things, but Hilary now realized that the American woman was just like an actor playing a part. She had no idea what Mrs. Baker was really thinking or feeling. In the evening they carried on their journey, this time in an open touring car. Everyone was wearing Moroccan clothes, the men in long white robes, and the women with their faces hidden. Again they drove all through the night, and stopped for breakfast when the sun came up. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Betterton?" asked Andy Peters. "I feel as if I'm in a dream," said Hilary. "Where are we?" "I don't know," he replied. "All I know is that we're in the desert, and in the desert we won't leave a trail behind us. Each part of our journey is separate. A plane that crashes, a station wagon, and now a touring car of Moroccans, which is a common sight on the road." "But where are we going?" said Hilary. "We'll find out soon," said Dr. Barron, as he joined them. "In the Western world, we always want to know things now. We think about tomorrow rather than today. But life is too short. There is so much to achieve, and there is not enough time. I need more time for my work," he said with passion. "And I need freedom from fools who constantly interrupt me and my work." "You work with viruses, don't you, Dr. Barron?" Peters asked. "Yes, I work with diseases. And to work properly, I need patience and a lot of money for equipment. With that, I can achieve anything." "Can you achieve happiness?" asked Hilary with a smile. He smiled back, suddenly human again. "Ah, you are a woman, madame. It is women who ask always for happiness." "The happiness of one person does not matter," said Peters seriously. "There must be happiness for all people. Science should be used to help everyone, and it should be shared, not controlled by one country or another." "Yes," said Erickson, who had just joined them. "You are right." But the scientists must be the masters. They are the only people who matter. They must control and rule the slaves." Hilary walked a little away from the group, and after a few minutes Peters followed her. "You look a bit scared," he said, with a laugh. "I think I am," said Hilary. "Of course I'm not a scientist, and I'm not very clever like the rest of you. I'm only a woman looking for happiness." "And what's wrong with that?" said Peters. Then he asked in a lower voice, "Why exactly are you here? Do you love your husband so much, or do you share his views?" Hilary avoided giving a direct answer. "Have you noticed that all our fellow travellers have very different views?" Peters thought for a moment. "I do believe you're right," he said. "Dr. Barron is only interested in his work," said Hilary, "while Helga Hime talks about slaves, and so does Torquil Eriksson. They are like mad scientists in a film." "And I believe in freedom for all," said Peters. "You're a loving wife, and Mrs. Baker, well, I think she's just doing this for the money." "She seems so ordinary," said Hilary, "and yet she's mixed up in all this." She shivered suddenly. "Are you cold?" asked Peters. "Let's move around for a bit." As they walked up and down, Peters suddenly picked up something from the ground. "Is this yours?" he said. "Oh, yes," Hilary replied. "It's a pearl from my necklace. I broke it the other day. It seems a long time ago now." She took the pearl from Peters. "Not real pearls, I hope?" "No, of course not," smiled Hilary. Peters offered her a cigarette. As she took one, Hilary said, "What a strange cigarette case. It's very heavy." "It's made of lead, that's why," Peters explained. "It's a war souvenir made from a bomb that tried to blow me up. But let's not talk about the war, let's talk about tomorrow." "But what can we talk about?" asked Hilary. "Nobody's told me anything. Are we—" Peters interrupted her. "You don't need to know. You just need to do what you're told and go where you're told. You need to obey." With sudden passion, Hilary said, "And do you like being given orders and told what to do?" "If it is necessary, yes," he replied. "And it is necessary. We must have a new world, a peaceful world, a world with order and discipline." "Is that possible?" "Anything's better than the mess we live in, don't you agree?" Hilary was tired and lonely. She wanted to say, "What's so wrong with the world we live in? Surely it's better to have a world where there is kindness and independence, even if it is a mess, rather than an ordered world with no pity or understanding or sympathy." But she stopped herself in time. "You're right," she said. "I'm just tired. I'll do what I'm told. I will obey." Andy Peters smiled. "That's better," he said. Chapter 10. As their journey continued, Hilary felt that she was living in a dream, as if she really was becoming Olive Betterton. Every day she became more and more serious and intense, like her companions. All five were so different, but slowly Hilary became a little frightened of all of them. They were all so determined and focused on one thing. They all had one thing that they believed in passionately, above all else. Dr. Barron cared only about his work. He was desperate for knowledge, to find things out. but he never asked himself why. It was the process of discovery that interested him. He told Hilary once that he had found a virus with the power to destroy a whole country, but he was interested in how it would destroy. He did not seem to think about the people the virus would kill. She didn't like Helga Hime at all, because the woman was so very arrogant. Hilary liked Peters, but sometimes he frightened her by the almost fanatical way he talked. She said to him once, "You don't want to create a new world, do you? You just want to destroy the old one. There's hate in you, I can feel it." Torquil Eriksson was more of a puzzle. He liked to dream of how he wanted the world to be. "We must take over the world," he said gently, "so we, the people with brains, can rule. That is all that matters." They are all mad, Hilary thought, but in different ways. Then she looked at Mrs. Baker. She wasn't interested in ruling the world. She didn't seem to believe in anything at all, except perhaps money. At the end of the third day of travelling, they arrived at a small town and slept in a local hotel for the night. Very early the next morning they were given European clothes to wear and drove to an airfield. There they boarded a small plane and flew for hours. Hilary looked out of the window and saw mountains through the clouds, but she had no idea where they were. In the early afternoon the plane landed on flat ground, surrounded by mountains. They had arrived at a private airfield, where there were 2 big cars waiting for them. "This is where the journey ends," said Mrs. Baker cheerfully. "The cars will be ready soon." Hilary stared at her. "But we haven't crossed the sea," she said in surprise. "Did you expect to?" Mrs. Baker seemed amused. "But where are we? What part of the world, I mean?" "Oh, that's no secret now. This is a lonely place in the high Atlas Mountains. We're still in Morocco." Mrs. Baker looked at her watch. "Well, goodbye, everyone," she said. "This is where I leave you." "Are you going back to Marrakesh?" asked Hilary. "No," said Mrs. Baker. "I can't do that. I'm supposed to have died in a plane crash. I'm going to organize people somewhere else now." "But what if someone recognizes you?" Hilary asked. "They won't," said Mrs. Baker. "I have a new passport now. My sister, Mrs. Baker, died in a plane crash. We look very alike. And no one I met knows me that well," she added. "To them I'm just another traveling American." "It's strange," Hilary said, "that even after travelling with you for so long, I don't know you very well. I don't even know which part of America you're from." "That doesn't matter," said Mrs. Baker. "I can never go back there." For a moment her face looked angry and spiteful. Then she said cheerfully, "Goodbye, Mrs. Betterton. I hope you see your husband soon." Hilary watched as Mrs. Baker said goodbye to the others before going back to the plane. Hilary shivered. Mrs. Baker was her last link with the outside world. Peters, standing near her, seemed to know what she was thinking. "This is the place of no return," he said quietly. "Do you want to go back, madame?" asked Dr. Barron. "Back to the world you have left?" "Could I go if I wanted to?" asked Hilary. "I don't know," said Peters. "Shall I ask Mrs. Baker before she leaves?" "Of course not," said Hilary sharply. "This is no place for women who are weak," said Helga Hime scornfully. "She is not weak," said Dr. Barron softly. She asks herself questions, as any intelligent woman would do. But Helga Hime ignored the Frenchman, while Ericsson asked, "When you have reached freedom, how can you think of going back?" "But if you can't go back or choose to go back," argued Hilary, "then it is not freedom." They were interrupted by one of the drivers telling them that the cars were ready. Hilary sat in the front next to the driver and talked to him in French as they drove along. "How long will it take us?" she asked. "To get to the hospital, about 2 hours, madame." Hilary was surprised at the driver's words. "Tell me about the hospital," she said. "Ah, madame, it is a wonderful place," the driver said with enthusiasm. "It has all the most modern equipment, and many doctors come to visit and are very impressed by the new treatments. Before, such people had to live completely separate and were left to die, but now they have a chance of a cure." "It seems a lonely place to have a hospital," said Hilary. "Ah, madame, but it has to be lonely. The authorities insist," said the driver. "See, over there," he pointed. "That is where we are going." In the distance, Hilary saw a low range of mountains, and at the bottom of one of the mountains was a long white building. "It is a wonderful place," said the driver again. "So much money has been spent. Our patron is one of the richest men in the world, and here he has done so much to help human suffering." At last the car stopped outside some huge iron gates. "You must walk from here, madame," explained the driver. As the travellers got out of the car, the big gates opened, and a tall, dark-skinned man wearing long white robes bowed and asked them to enter. As they walked through the gates, they saw a large courtyard with a tall wire fence where people were walking up and down. As these people turned to look at the new arrivals, Hilary gasped in horror. "But they're lepers!" she exclaimed. "Lepers!" Chapter 11. The huge iron gates closed firmly behind the travellers. To Hilary this felt like the end. There was no way out. Now she was alone, and soon she would be discovered. She had known all day that this moment would come. Jessup had said that if she got this far, she would have protection, but if she was supposed to rely on Miss Hetherington, that plan had failed. And what, thought Hilary, could Miss Hetherington have done to help her now? Now that she was close to discovery and death, Hilary realized that she no longer wanted to die. She was enjoying life again. She could think of Nigel and Brenda with sadness and pity, not cold, lifeless despair. "I'm alive again at last," thought Hilary. "But now I'm trapped, like a rat in a trap. Can I find a way out?" She had often thought about what would happen when she met Tom Betterton. He would say, "That's not my wife," and everyone would know she was a spy. So what could she do? Perhaps she could speak first. She could say, "Who are you? You're not my husband." If she pretended well enough, would they believe her? If they did believe her, it would be bad for Betterton. But if he was a traitor who had sold his country's secrets, didn't he deserve it? This was the only thing she could think of that was worth trying. Hilary had been thinking all this as she walked along. She felt a little faint, but tried hard to focus on what was happening. They were being welcomed by a big, handsome man who spoke a few words to everyone in their own language. To Hilary he said, "Ah, Mrs. Betterton, welcome after your long and difficult journey. Your husband is waiting for you, very excited." He smiled, though Hilary noticed that his eyes stayed cold. "You must be longing to see him." Hilary suddenly felt faint again, and Andy Peters put out an arm and steadied her as she swayed. "Perhaps you don't know," he said, "that Mrs. Betterton was in a plane crash and has concussion. The journey has been hard for her. She should lie down." Hilary thought how kind he was, and she held onto his arm for support. She wanted to faint, to lie down, anything to delay the moment of discovery. But Betterton would come to see her, any husband would, and he would realize that she was not his wife. Then suddenly Hilary's courage returned. She stood up straight and lifted her head. She would be brave. She would say to Betterton, "I'm sorry, but your wife is dead. I promised to reach you and give you her final message. I agree with your views and I want to help." It wasn't a very convincing story, and it didn't explain things like her fake passport. But sometimes, thought Hilary, if you tell lies with enough confidence, people do believe you. I have to try. "Oh, no, I must see Tom," she said. "I must see him now, please." "Of course, Mrs. Betterton," said the big man. "I'll take you to him now. Please follow me." As she walked away, Hilary looked over her shoulder. Andy Peters was watching her, and his face looked puzzled and unhappy. "He has realized something is wrong," she thought, "but he doesn't know what it is." Hilary shivered. She might never see him again. The big man was talking cheerfully. "This way, Mrs. Betterton. Our buildings are rather confusing at first. There are so many wide corridors that all look the same." "It's all a little strange, and rather frightening," said Hilary. "The lepers—" Yes, of course, they do upset our new arrivals. But, you'll get used to them. By the way, my name is Van Heidem, Dr. Paul Van Heidem. We're nearly there now." Nearly there. Nearly there. They went down another wide corridor, and Van Heidem finally stopped at a door, knocked and opened it. "Ah, Betterton," he said. "Here's your wife at last." Hilary walked in bravely, holding her head up. A very good-looking man with fair hair stood by the window. Hilary was surprised. This man did not look like the photograph of Tom Betterton. She decided to take a risk. She stepped forward and then back. "But that isn't Tom," she said. "That isn't my husband." She thought she sounded convincing. And then Tom Betterton laughed. "It must be good," he said to Van Heidem, "if even my own wife doesn't recognize me." He quickly walked over to Hilary and held her tightly in his arms. "Olive, darling, it's really me, Tom, even if my face has changed a little." Then Hilary heard him whisper, "Be careful, danger." Betterton looked at her face before holding her again. "Darling, it's been so long since I've seen you," he continued. "But you're here at last." Hilary felt his fingers pressing hard into her back as if giving her a warning. "I still can't believe you're here," he said with an excited little laugh. "But you know it's me now, don't you?" Hilary didn't understand it, couldn't understand it, but she gratefully tried to play her part. "Tom," she said. "Oh, Tom, but what—" "I've had plastic surgery," he explained, "to change my face." He kissed her lightly. "It's been so long," said Hilary, "and I—" She swayed a little. Please, can I sit down?" "Of course, darling," said Betterton, getting her a chair. "You've had such a bad time, and that plane crash. I'm so glad you're all right." So they knew about the plane crash, thought Hilary. That means they must be in communication with the outside world. "The concussion has affected my memory," she said. "I forget things and get confused, and then when I finally see you, you look like a total stranger. It's a bit much for me." "You just need to rest for a while, darling," said Betterton. Van Hydem moved towards the door. "I will leave you alone now," he said. "Perhaps later, Betterton, you will bring your wife to the registry?" He went out and shut the door. Immediately Betterton dropped on his knees in front of Hilary and rested his face on her shoulder. "Darling, darling," he said out loud. Then Hilary heard him whisper, "Keep going, they might be listening." Hilary could feel his fear and uneasiness. She looked at him and saw a good-looking man of about 30 who was badly frightened. He looked as if he was close to a nervous collapse. Now that the immediate danger was over, Hilary began to enjoy playing her part. She must be Olive Betterton, act and feel just as Olive would. And the situation was so unreal she didn't feel as if she was Hilary Craven any more. She remembered the details she had learned with Jessup. "It seems such a long time since we lived at our house, Furbank," she said. "Whiskers, do you remember my cat, Whiskers? She had kittens just after you went away. It's strange that there are so many silly little things you don't even know about." "I know," said Betterton. "That was the old life. Here we'll begin a new life." "And it's all right here? You're happy?" Hilary was sure a loving wife would ask this. "It's wonderful." Tom Betterton lifted his head. His unhappy, frightened eyes looked out of a smiling, confident face. "The working conditions are perfect. There's everything you could ever want here." "And is it really a leper colony?" "Oh, yes. The doctors here are researching the disease, but it's just a disguise, a cover." "I see." Hilary looked round. "Is this our apartment?" "Yes. Sitting room, bathroom and bedroom. I'll show you." Hilary walked through the apartment. Everything was of good quality and very comfortable. There was a lot of space in the cupboards. "I don't know what I'll put in here," she said with a laugh. "I didn't bring anything with me." "Don't worry," said Tom. "You can get anything you want here. There's no need to go outside ever again." He said the words lightly, but Hilary heard the despair in his voice. No need to go outside ever again. They were in a cage, trapped. And were they being spied on too? Was someone listening and watching them now? Tom Betterton thought so, but was he right? Or was he in such a nervous state that he was imagining things? Was this what happened to you when you lived in a cage? "Would you like to lie down to rest?" Tom asked. "No." Hilary hesitated. "No, I don't think so." "Then perhaps you had better come with me to the registry." "What's the registry?" "It's where they record everything about you, health, blood pressure, likes, dislikes, everything. It's very well organized here." "I knew it would be," said Hilary. She tried to speak with real enthusiasm. Tom Betterton kissed her again. "Keep going," he whispered. Out loud, he said, "And now let's go to the registry." Chapter 12. The registry was managed by a strict-looking Swiss woman who wore glasses and had an unattractive hairstyle. "Ah," she said when they arrived, "you've brought Mrs. Betterton." As Hilary sat down, the woman took out a lot of forms and started to write. Tom Betterton said awkwardly, "I'll leave you, Olive," and shut the door behind him. "Now then," said the woman seriously, "tell me your full name, please. Age. Where you were born. Parents' names. Any serious illnesses. Hobbies. List of any jobs held. Degrees from any university. What you like to eat and drink." The questions went on and on. Hilary answered almost without thinking, glad that she was so well prepared about Olive's life. When they finally finished, Hilary was given a thorough medical examination, and then she saw Dr. Rubeck, a tall, sad-looking Swiss man of about 40, for intelligence and personality tests. Hilary was nervous about the tests, but they seemed to be routine. When they were over, Dr. Rubeck said, "Please do not think I am being rude, madame, when I say that it is a pleasure to deal with someone who is not a genius." Hilary laughed. "Oh, I'm certainly not a genius," she said. "You are fortunate," said Dr. Rubeck. "It will make your life here much easier. I mostly see very sensitive, intellectual people here, but they are not always emotionally stable. Real scientists are not cool and calm like they are in books. You would not believe the arguments and the jealousies that I have to deal with here." Next, Hilary was taken to the dress department, which was run by Mademoiselle Laroche. The Frenchwoman was not what Hilary was expecting. She used to work in a famous Paris fashion house where rich women bought their clothes and was interested in purely feminine things. "I am delighted to meet you, madame," she said to Hilary. "I'm sure you are tired after your journey, so perhaps today you should just select a few essential items." "I'd like that," said Hilary. "All I own now is a toothbrush." Mademoiselle Laroche laughed and took Hilary into a large room with many cupboards filled with clothes of every different size and style. There were also endless underclothes, shoes, makeup, and toiletries. Hilary chose a few things from the huge selection, and one of the assistants was told to take everything to her apartment. "It will be a pleasure to help you choose some more clothes later, when you are more rested," said Mademoiselle Laroche. "You are not like scientific ladies. They do not care what they wear or what they look like. Ah, here is Miss Jensen." A thin girl with dark hair and glasses had entered the dress department. After she had introduced herself, Miss Jensen said, "If you've finished here now, Mrs. Betterton, I will take you back to Dr. Van Heidem. He is the deputy director in charge of managing the unit." Hilary followed Miss Jensen to Van Heidem's office. "So, Mrs. Betterton," said Van Heidem when Hilary arrived, "I'm sure you are glad to see your husband again. I hope you'll be very happy here." "Thank you." Hilary sat down. "Do you want to ask me any questions?" the doctor said. Hilary laughed. "I have so many questions to ask that I don't know where to begin." "Oh, I understand," he said, "but my advice is not to ask anything. Just take some time to adapt and see what happens. That's the best thing to do." "But I know so little," said Hilary. "It's all so unexpected." "Yes," Van Heidem laughed. "Our desert home is quite a surprise to most people. We don't tell anyone about it before they get here, but we do our best to make everyone comfortable, and if there's anything you need, any particular books or music, for example, just ask." After a pause, he continued, It usually takes people a few weeks to get used to living here, especially wives. Sometimes wives take time to make new friends. And do we stay here, or do we move on to somewhere else? Van Heyden became rather vague. There are possibilities, he said. It depends on your husband, but let's not talk about that now. Can I go out at all? Asked Hilary. I mean, go outside the gates? I'm often asked that question, said Van Heyden. His voice was kind. But our unit is a world in itself. It has everything you need, and outside there is only desert. He smiled. After a while, Mrs. Betterton, you won't want to go out. You won't want to go back to the bad old world you have left behind. Chapter 13. Hilary was back in her apartment. The clothes she had chosen had arrived, and she put them away in the wardrobe. I went to see the deputy director, Hilary told Betterton. Yes, he manages the unit, said Betterton. But it's the director who's really in charge. They spoke carefully in case someone was listening. We don't see the director very often, though he sometimes gives a speech. He's very inspiring. He looked at his watch. We should go down to dinner now, if you're ready. He spoke as though they were staying in a hotel. Hilary was wearing a grey-green dress that she had chosen earlier, which looked very attractive with her red hair. They went down the stairs and along several corridors until they reached a large dining room. Miss Jensen showed them to their table, where Andy Peters and Ericsson were already sitting. Hilary introduced her husband to the two men. They sat down and were soon joined by another couple, who Betterton introduced as Dr. Simon Murchison and his wife Bianca. Simon and I work together, he explained. Simon Murchison was a thin, pale young man, and his wife Bianca had dark hair and came from Italy. Tomorrow, she said to Hilary, I will show you around. Are you a scientist too? I'm afraid not, said Hilary. I used to work as a secretary. Then perhaps you can help me organize some events here, suggested Bianca. Hilary was quick to agree to this plan. Then Andy Peters said, I feel like a new boy at school. I'll be glad to start work. It's a wonderful place to work, said Simon Murchison with enthusiasm. No interruptions, and everything you need. What exactly are you working on? Asked Andy Peters. All the men started talking about scientific things that Hilary didn't understand. She spoke for a while to Bianca Murchison, who told her about some of the social activities. You can play card games, and there is a cinema, and sometimes dancing, and there is tennis and squash. I don't really want to do anything else tonight, said Hilary, yawning. I just want to go to bed. Yes, dear, said Tom Betterton. You need a good night's rest after your tiring journey. But do come up to the roof garden for a while. The air is wonderful at night. They went up in a lift operated by a tall, dark-skinned man wearing white robes. To Hilary's surprise, the roof garden was beautiful, like a fairy story from the book Arabian Nights. There was the sound of water, tall palm trees, and lots of green plants. It must have cost a lot of money to create such a beautiful green garden in the desert. Hilary and Betterton walked around the garden, and gradually all the other people who had been enjoying the night air went back inside. The air was cold, and Hilary could see the stars as they sat down, alone at last. Now tell me, said Betterton in a low, nervous voice, who are you? Hilary looked at him. Before she answered, she had a question of her own. "Why did you say I was your wife?" "I don't know. I was stupid. I thought perhaps you had come to get me out of here." "So you want to get out of here?" "Of course I do. Do you need to ask?" "Did you know you were coming here?" asked Hilary. "I didn't know I was coming to Africa, but I knew what I was doing and came willingly. I wasn't kidnapped. I believed in sharing information with other scientists, and I believed in peace and freedom for everyone." Tom Betterton laughed bitterly. "But there's no freedom here," he said. "I'm always watched and spied on. Or am I? Perhaps I'm imagining things. Why should they bother? I can't leave or get away. It's like a prison." "So it isn't how you imagined it?" Hilary asked. "It is in some ways. The working conditions are perfect, and there's everything you need, but you're still in prison." "I know," agreed Hilary. "It was horrible when the gates closed behind us today." "So now answer my question," said Betterton. "Why are you here pretending to be Olive? Where is Olive?" "Olive—" Hilary stopped, trying to think of the right words. "What's happened to her? What are you trying to say?" "I'm sorry, so sorry," said Hilary, looking at his nervous face. "But your wife is dead. She was in a plane crash and died 2 days later." Betterton stared straight ahead of him. He didn't show any emotion. "So Olive's dead?" "I see." There was a long silence. Then he turned to her. "So Olive's dead," he said again. "But why are you here?" Hilary was ready for this question. Betterton thought she had come to help him escape, but that wasn't true. She was a spy, here to get information, and now she too was a prisoner. But she wasn't going to tell him that. He was too nervous and frightened to keep a secret. "I was at the hospital with your wife when she died. She wanted to tell you something, so I said I would try to reach you." As Betterton frowned, Hilary hurried on before he could realize how weak her story was. "I agree with your ideas," she said. "I, too, want peace and freedom, and with my red hair, well, it seemed worth trying." "Yes," he said. "Your hair's exactly like Olive's." "And your wife was so desperate to tell you something, to tell you to be careful, very careful, that you were in danger, from someone called Boris." "Boris? Boris Glider?" "Yes, do you know him?" "I've never met him," said Betterton. "He's my first wife's cousin. Had Olive seen him? What did he say to her?" "I don't know. That's all she said. And oh, yes, she said that she couldn't believe it." "Believe what?" "I don't know," said Hilary. "You see, she was dying." An expression of pain crossed Betterton's face. "I know you say she's dead, but at the moment I can't really believe it." "But what did she mean about Boris? How can he be dangerous to me here?" "I don't know," Hilary said again. There was silence for a moment. "Oh, well, it doesn't matter," said Betterton. "We can't escape." "Oh, yes, we can," said Hilary. "We'll find a way." He stared at her. "You have no idea how hard it would be." "There's always a way," said Hilary confidently. "We just need time and a good plan." "Time," he said. "I don't have time. I can't work properly here. I can't think. They want new and original work, and I just can't do it. It's driving me mad. I'm no use to them like this. They'll kill me." "Oh, no! Yes, they will." "The only thing that's saved me is that I've had lots of plastic surgery, and I needed time to recover, but that's finished now." "But why did you have plastic surgery at all?" "For my own safety," said Betterton. "The police are looking for me. They want to arrest me." "You mean," said Hilary, "because you sold secrets?" He wouldn't look at her. "I didn't sell anything. I gave them what they wanted. I wanted to share all my scientific knowledge. Don't you understand?" Hilary thought that she did understand. Andy Peters and Torquil Erickson would do the same. They would betray their country because they believed that sharing their knowledge would create a better world. Betterton looked round him nervously. "Everyone's gone," he said. "We should go back down." Hilary stood up. "I've just arrived," she said. "They'll understand that we want to be alone." "We'll have to go on pretending," Betterton said awkwardly. "That you're my wife, I mean." He stopped, embarrassed. Hilary looked at Tom standing in front of her. "How handsome he is," thought Hilary, "but I'm not at all attracted to him." "Don't worry," she said cheerfully. "The most important thing is to get out of here." Chapter 14. In a hotel room in Marrakesh, Jessup was talking to Miss Hetherington. This woman looked the same as the Miss Hetherington that Hilary had known, but she behaved very differently. Now she was confident and positive, and seemed much younger. The third person in the room was a dark-haired, solid-looking Frenchman called Leblanc. Janet Hetherington was telling Jessup about the people that Hilary, as Olive Betterton, had talked to when they were in Fez. "There was Mrs. Baker, who I had already met at Casablanca," she said. "I still can't decide about her. She was friendly with Olive Betterton, but Americans travelling abroad often are friendly, and she was on the plane too." "Yes, what do you think about this plane crash, Leblanc?" said Jessup, turning towards the Frenchman. "We don't know why the plane crashed," the Frenchman replied, "but everyone on board was killed." "What do you know about the pilot?" asked Jessup. "Only that he was young and was a good pilot," said Leblanc, "and badly paid." He paused. "But there were 7 bodies. They were badly burned and couldn't be identified, but there were still 7 bodies." Jessup turned back to Janet Hetherington. "Did Mrs. Betterton speak to anyone else?" "She did talk to one of the waiters and Mr. Aristides," she replied. "Ah," said Leblanc. "Mr. Aristides, one of the richest men in the world, and what does he do with all that money? He shuts himself away in a castle in Spain and collects, so they say, Chinese pottery." Mrs. Betterton also visited the old town of Fez with one of the guides, said Miss Hetherington. "Someone may have contacted her then." "And she suddenly decided to go to Marrakesh," said Jessup thoughtfully. "Not suddenly," said Miss Hetherington. "Her tickets were already booked." "I mean Mrs. Baker, not Mrs. Betterton," explained Jessup. Mrs. Baker suddenly decided to go to Marrakesh, and surely it's strange that Olive Betterton was involved in 2 plane crashes. He paused. Here's another idea. Perhaps the crash was faked. LeBlanc looked interested. It could be done, yes, he said. They could land the plane and set it on fire, but the bodies, there were still 7 badly burned bodies on that plane. I know, said Jessup. That's the problem. And there's no trail to follow. I have people searching the area where the plane crashed, said LeBlanc. It's a very lonely place. The plane was off its course, flying in the wrong direction. I'm sure that's important, Jessup said. Let's look at the passenger list again. The Frenchman gave the list to Jessup, and they both examined it carefully. Mrs. Baker, American. Mrs. Betterton, English. Torquil Eriksson, Norwegian. I've heard his name before, said Jessup, frowning. I'm sure he's a scientist of some sort. Then there is a nun, Sister Marie, said LeBlanc, and Andrew Peters, American, and Dr. Baron, an expert on diseases. That all fits in with what we're looking for, said Jessup. The telephone on the table rang, and LeBlanc answered it. Ah, yes, he said. Send them in. He turned to Jessup. My men have found something, he said with excitement. A few moments later, 2 men entered the room, a Frenchman and a local Moroccan man. I told the local people that there was a reward if they found anything, the first man said to LeBlanc, and this man has found something important. The Moroccan took a small object from underneath his white robes. It was a large pearl. Jessup took the pearl and looked at it closely with a magnifying glass. Yes, the mark is there, he said with excitement. Good girl, she did it. LeBlanc was questioning the Moroccan in Arabic. He turned to Jessup. This pearl was found nearly half a mile from the burning plane. That means, said Jessup, that Olive Betterton survived the plane crash, and though 7 burnt bodies were found, one of them was definitely not hers. I will tell my men to search a bigger area now, said LeBlanc, and this man here will get a big reward. When the other local people hear about it, they will look very carefully for these pearls. I just hope, he added thoughtfully, that her fellow travellers didn't realize what she was doing. Why should they? Asked Jessup. Olive Betterton has broken her necklace, and a few pearls fell out of her pocket. It isn't suspicious. LeBlanc looked at the passenger list again. Mrs. Baker, American. Mrs. Betterton, English. Torquil Eriksson, Norwegian, a scientist. We know nothing about him. There is a nun, Sister Marie, a good disguise, perhaps, and Andrew Peters, a nuclear chemist, also American. Last there is Dr. Baron, a famous doctor, I believe. All these people have been cleverly brought together to travel in that plane, which is later found on fire with 7 dead bodies inside. It is amazing. I wonder how they did it. I don't know, said Jessup, but putting the bodies there was very convincing. But now, because of the pearl, we know that 6 or 7 people in that plane have started a new journey. We should move to a hotel nearer where the plane crashed, said LeBlanc, in case other evidence is found nearby. Over the next few days, Jessup and Leblanc worked very hard, calculating how far a car could travel from where the plane crashed in each direction, and where it would stop. There were lots of false trails, but at last they got results. "We have found something," Leblanc told Jessup. A pearl was found in a local man's house. He was paid a great deal of money not to tell anyone that 6 people stayed the night there, and children in a local village nearby have found 2 more pearls. So now we know which direction they went in. "That's good news," said Jessup. "There is more, my friend," said Leblanc. A local man saw a car driving in the night. As it passed, he saw the sign of the Hand of Fatima on one side. It shone in the dark. It was a good idea of yours to put luminous paint on a glove. It only shows up at night." "It works well," said Jessup, "but it's dangerous because the people in the car can see it too." "It cannot be seen in daylight," said Leblanc. "And the Hand of Fatima is a popular religious sign. It is painted on many different vehicles." "That's true," agreed Jessup, "but we must still be careful. If they did notice it, it could be a false trail." The next morning Leblanc excitedly brought in some new evidence. 3 pearls arranged in a triangle stuck together with chewing gum. "3 pearls in a triangle," said Jessup. "That's our sign to say that the next part of the journey was by plane." "You're right," said Leblanc. "This was found on an old army airfield in a very lonely place. It is not used anymore, but there were signs that a plane landed and left there not long ago." "Another plane," said Jessup slowly. "So now there is no trail, and we don't know where they've gone. Again, they have left for an unknown destination." Chapter 15. "I can't believe," thought Hilary, "that I've been here 10 days. The most frightening thing was how quickly and easily she had adapted to life in the unit. After only a week she had begun to accept her way of life as natural. It was a strange life where nothing was real, like living in a dream. Perhaps she would always feel like she was living in a dream. Perhaps she would never wake up. It was interesting, thought Hilary, to see how her fellow travellers reacted to life in the unit. She didn't meet Helga Hime very often, but the German woman seemed happy and satisfied. Dr. Barron, who Hilary sometimes talked to, was impressed with the working conditions and loved his work, although he admitted that he had not expected to live in a prison. "But I was paid a large amount of money before I came here," he added, "and when all this comes to an end, I will be able to spend it." "When all this comes to an end," Hilary repeated. "Why should that happen?" "My dear," said Dr. Barron, "nothing is permanent. In time the unit will break up and fall apart. What happens here is too strange, too unreal. It will not last. But until that happens, I am happy to work here." Torquil Eriksson also seemed to be quite happy living in the unit. Hilary didn't understand him. He seemed to live in a world of his own, a world that didn't really exist. Only he could see this ideal world where the scientists ruled and controlled everything. It existed only in his own head. Andy Peters was easier for Hilary to understand. Like her, Peters hated living in the unit. "I had no idea what it would really be like," he told Hilary. "I have to get out of here." "It won't be easy," said Hilary quietly. They were walking together on the roof garden. "No," said Peters. "It won't be easy, but it's not impossible. Nothing's impossible." "I like to hear you say that," said Hilary. "I hate it here, but I'm more afraid that I'll get used to it." "Yes," Peters said thoughtfully. "I've wondered about that. What does your husband think? He's been here a while now." "Tom, I don't know. It's so difficult. Hilary was silent. For 10 days she had lived with, and shared a bedroom with, a man who was a complete stranger to her. She didn't understand Tom Betterton. He didn't seem to be upset by his real wife's death. All he could think about was getting away from the unit. Again and again he said, "I must get away from here. I must. But the way he said this was very different to the way Peters said it. Peters was a young, angry man, confident that he would be able to escape. Tom Betterton sounded like a man who was about to collapse, a man who was almost crazy. Perhaps, Hilary thought suddenly, this was what she and Peters would be like in 6 months' time. She wished she could talk to Andy Peters about this. She wished she could say, "Tom Betterton isn't my husband. I know nothing about him, and I don't know what to do or say to help him." Instead, she chose her words carefully. "Tom seems like a stranger to me now. He doesn't tell me things. Sometimes I think being shut up in here is driving him mad. How can we get out of here?" "We've got to plan it very carefully, Olive," Peters said. "If there's a way in, there's a way out. We'll need to be clever and pretend to play a part. Perhaps pay someone who works here to help, but we can do it. We will get out." "I'm sure you will," said Hilary. "But what about me?" "Well, it's different for you." Peters sounded embarrassed. For a moment Hilary wondered what he meant, and then she realized that he was talking about Tom Betterton. She had come here to be with the man she loved, and she had got what she wanted.